Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us in this Sunday afternoon evening, to this amazing plenary that we got planned for you, and in our second day of Stand Up to Racism conference. So my name is Maryam. I'm going to be one of your chairs for today. Stand Up to Racism is a campaign with broad alliances that bring together anti-racists from across trade unions, faith organization, campaigns, and communities. We seek to link issues, organize campaigns, and build unity against all forms of racism, Islamophobia, and anti-Semitism. This year's Black History Month is a poignant reminder of the importance of campaigning against racism. In the wake of the Black Lives Matter movement, the government catastrophic handling of the coronavirus, in failing to take timely measures to eliminate the virus, continues to disproportionately impact Black, Asian, and minority ethnic communities. We need a zero COVID strategy. The evidence over the last 6 months of the COVID crisis show there is no trade-off between health and the economy. The US election campaign, the global pandemic, the initiation of BLM by the US police killing Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, and others. The death of neo-Nazi Golden Dawn in Greece has given momentum. The defeat of neo-Nazi Golden Dawn in Greece has given momentum to the movement against racism and fascism globally. We know that whipping up of racism by politicians is routinely met with racist attack on the ground. Days after Patel's speech at the beginning of September, a violent racist attack occurred in which a man armed with a knife entered a law firm. The racist tide will only be driven back by anti-racists standing up and confronting it. From Germany to Greece to the US and in the UK, people who want a society free from racism are saying no more. So without further ado, I am going to pass on to my co-chair that will be introducing to our first speaker. Sorry if you will be hearing a little of the background noise. In my side, I have a 1-year-old that will be running around. And I think that's one of the Zoom things we have learned during this pandemic. Passing on to Nadia.
Thanks, Maryam. And just to introduce myself again, I'm Nadia, and I'm going to be co-chairing this plenary this evening. And I just want to say, we have an amazing lineup of speakers for our plenary tonight. But we also want to hear from you at home as well. So if you're watching this, whether that's on Facebook, on YouTube, please comment on the live stream. Share your thoughts with us, let us know what you think of the amazing talks we'll hear this evening, and also share the live streams as well, and help us reach as many people as possible and involve as many people as possible in this very important discussion. And I'm pleased to announce, to kick off this evening's discussion, we'll be hearing from Belle Ribeiro-Addy. Belle is a member of Parliament for Streatham and is formerly the Shadow Minister for Immigration as well. So Belle, over to you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to speak. I bring you all greetings from the People's Republic of Streatham in South London, and as well as Streatham that covers some areas of Brixton, Tulse Hill, Balham and Clapham. Now, I would say that we meet at an important time, and I'll probably say that every single time we meet, because I believe there's never a more important time to stand up to racism. The Black Lives Matter movement over this past year, we've seen an uprising, and it has been amazing in terms of what we have been able to achieve in terms of moving the debate forward. But we also need not to be fooled into thinking that incidents of racism are isolated incidents. We need to be clear about exactly what the system of oppression that we're looking at is, and how we have come to this place that we are. It's a system of oppression and brutality that has gone on for hundreds of years, and it has not ended at all. And we find it most prevalent at the moment in state-sanctioned racism, but obviously that's not the only places where we find racism. And it's really, really important that we don't fall into the trap of blaming individuals. Blaming individuals is not the answer, because we need systemic changes overall. We need to change the discourse. We need to bring an end to international institutional racism. Now, as internationalists, I'm really proud when I see us coming out in support of our sisters and brothers in the US, and I see, Black and white people out across this country protesting, and over the past few months it has been in reaction to what happened in the US with George Floyd. But I really, really want to see more and more people coming out when these things happen in the UK. I think about the cases of Ricky Real, Smiley Culture, Jimmy Mbenga, and others, and I think about the numbers that didn't come out for them. So it's absolutely important that we stand up for people internationally, but we shouldn't be waiting for what's happening in the US before we take a stand in this country, because there are so many things that are happening here, so many injustices that we need to take a stand for. Now, I'm thinking about, whilst we are in a global pandemic, what this government is attempting to get passed. Now, you'd think that as a member of Parliament, in Parliament, we'd be discussing the main issues of the day, which are getting us through this pandemic, but instead the government has decided to go down a completely irrelevant course. We are looking at things such as the Overseas Operations Bill, which would give our troops abroad the right to commit human rights abuses and not be charged for them, and then have any officers who's faced any issues not be able to take action against the Ministry of Defence. We've got our immigration bill coming tomorrow, and even though looking at this country and what's happened during the pandemic and how we've depended on migrants to see us through, we are about to drag 3 million EU nationals under the hostile environment. In the Lords, they made several changes to the bill, for example, including protections for refugees, which tomorrow the Conservative government will want to pull out. And looking at what's happening with our NHS, I couldn't see a logical reason to create a bill that would make it harder for us to have the workers that we need in this country. And also the covert human intelligence sources bill, the spy cops bill, that would give state agents the power to break the law without oversight or limitations. That's something which they rushed through recently, and you think to yourself, why now? This piece of legislation fails to rule out human rights violations or the infiltration of progressive movements, protest organisations such as Stand Up to Racism, and our trade unions would be at threat. And we know that when these actions are put down, these pieces of legislation, they are more likely to be, BAME communities are more likely to be implicated, more likely to be affected by it, and that there is no protection. So I find it hard to see how bills such as this and actions that the government are taking at the moment are not simply just more iterations of the expansion of state surveillance and the criminalisation of marginalised communities. We shouldn't be letting our fundamental values on human rights and justice and equality be undermined at all at any point in time. And I say this because, again, I don't understand why we're talking about all these things when we're meant to be dealing with the coronavirus, especially when we know how badly it's being handled at the moment. Now, the Tories have following, well, throughout the pandemic, have been absolutely disgraceful. They've left us during the worst economic shock of any OECD country, and one of the highest coronavirus death tolls in Europe and the world. And they were slow to realise the threat that the virus posed. They were slow to acquire life-saving equipment, slow to take action to safeguard human life, and they hesitated to adopt bold policies and bold economic policies to support people. And I compare it to countries like New Zealand, where they adopted a zero COVID policy, where they've only had 22 deaths. I mean, economically similar, we're heading for nearly 60,000, and that's an absolute disgrace. But one thing they have managed to do is to pay all of their mates and Tory donors large amounts of money in terms of outsourcing contracts, all of these things. I mean, £12 billion for a track and trace system that doesn't even work, given to Serco. Serco, those of you who are immigration rights activists will know that Serco run a lot of immigration detention centres, and will also know that they've been absolutely disgraceful there, and they've even defrauded the government at times, but they've been given all of that money. And this is how badly this track and trace system doesn't work. You may have heard about a case of a member of parliament contracting COVID, getting on a train, coming down and then going back up to Scotland after testing positive. Now, if the track and trace system worked, it would have beeped on anybody in Parliament system saying that there had been somebody with COVID in our area, but not a single MP's device or their app flared up. So that is just how badly it works. It works so badly that they cannot even make it work for themselves. It's an absolute disgrace, and we know that it's BAME communities that were disproportionately affected at a certain point in time. And as we head for a second wave that the government are clearly not prepared for, and have clearly not taken on board all of those measures that were put forward to help through various reviews to help support disadvantaged communities, BAME communities through the virus, we need to be very, very careful and think about what we can do to take action to protect our communities. Now, I'm being asked to wrap up, so I just wanted to make the point finally that whilst we are in Black History Month, about not having learnt a lot about Black history at school, but also letting everybody know that at a time like this, and due to the Black Lives Matter movement petitions, and you'll know about petitions that go to the House of Commons quite a bit, there has been no single petition that has received any greater numbers than the petition to have Black history taught in our schools. And even with that, the Department of Education has denied a change in the curriculum. So I just want to let everybody know that before I go, and just reiterate the point that we need real systemic change, not tokenistic change, and it's only going to happen if we stand together to challenge racism. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Belle, for this amazing for this amazing word. And we do need systematic change, definitely. And this is a way forward of getting that. Please, as what Nadia said, share the live. We are live on YouTube and Facebook, so do share it around so people can get to hear this amazing panelist. But also, as we say, we'll be do comment, get involved, interact with us. We'll be reading out your comments. People are sending solidarity from Birmingham, Southeast London, Glasgow, Norfolk, Barrow in Furness, Tower Hamlet, Cambridge, Sheffield and Brighton, Warsaw, Scarborough, Hertfordshire, and so on. And people that are also in Europe are sending their solidarity. So yeah, this is going to be an amazing panel. Without further ado, I'm delighted to introduce our next speaker, Ryan Colasso. Ryan, in May, we have seen a viral video going around about stop and search. So in May, Ryan was interviewed on Channel 4 on his view on police racism and his recent experience of stop and search. On his way home from the interview, Ryan was stopped and searched again, with officers smashing his car window while arresting him. So delighted to introduce Ryan.
Yes, hello there. Thank you very much for that introduction. I don't think the papers and also social media have actually done a lot of justice to me with the video. It's a lot worse than the story even comes out as. I'll go through it quickly and with what I can. So it was the 23rd of May. The Met Police aggressively tailgated me. They started banging on my window. I thought I was under arrest. When I asked what the search was for, they threw handcuffs on me, got me out my vehicle, started lying about a large smell of cannabis, as they routinely do. So I was really angry because they still started making up other things. I decided to put a picture on social media. It's turned into a whole thread now. And they ignored it. I tagged them, they completely ignored it. So I decided to upload the video to social media. It got the attention of Channel 4. And 6 days later, from that initial stop, I went for an interview to speak about it, about systematic racism in the whole system and the police. On my way home from that interview, possibly about 30 to 40 minutes later, while I was parked up checking my phone, about to order food, I got blocked in. The City of London police lied I might be dashing stuff within my waistband. They did say that they believed it would be Class A or B drugs. So that's even worse than the Class C cannabis drugs they tried to accuse me of. They decided to smash my window in within 4 minutes. I got assaulted. I got drug tested on. They arrested me. They took me into custody. I got held in a police station. And for 6 hours, I didn't get to see a nurse despite them assaulting me. I got strip searched, again, nothing found. And you can't make this up. They watched my interview while I was in custody. When they let me out in the morning, I got released on the investigation for obstructing the drug search with no drugs or anything incriminating found. I got made to walk to my car around 5 a.m. I had to walk around for hours because I was in the City of London. There was nowhere to go at that time. I had to get my car back. They decided to stop me again on my way to get my car back while walking. And they insinuated I was up to no good, despite the officer that stopped me knowing that I was in custody, because he asked me, weren't you in custody this morning? And you can't make this up again. Within 30 minutes, they sent that same officer to give me my car back from where it was locked up. It was completely trashed. I had my head in my hands. And I'm still angry to this day because I still get followed by the police. And just when I confirmed my attendance for this Zoom meeting, I got stopped again. So only in the last 2 weeks, I got stopped again. I got put in handcuffs. They started lying about stolen property in my vehicle, said I avoided them when I saw them. I didn't even see them. I got done for illegal number plates, even though my number plates are legal, and this is the stress I'm getting now. I went to a police station to verify them legal. I passed MOT again recently. And to me, this is just racist policing. Again, it happens because when they don't find anything, they want to incriminate people. And it's quite stressful because I got to live like this. I don't want my car anymore. I don't want it. I need a new car. I can't afford it. I work in the film industry in location management and location scouting. That involves my vehicle. So they're affecting my job. I got stopped while I was working. This is affecting my work time and my personal life. And I just do need another car. And just to go on a few examples on this as well, with Cressida Dick, she's denied institutional racism. And it's really distressing because considering a lot of people in the BAME community, in her workforce. So the senior officers, especially Black and Asian ones, have actually called it out. And she's denied it. She's just said they have a right to do it, but she doesn't believe it exists. And that's a problem. She needs to go. This is a whole systematic problem, as Belle was just talking about. And it starts in the system and it goes into other institutions, especially the ones that are government controlled. And the police are not exempt from that. There's also a lot of lack of empathy and accountability. There's never any apologies. Despite them trashing my car and saying it was okay at the time, they've actually come back to me now and they've said that they shouldn't have trashed my car, but again, no apology. And in the recent stop, my car was trashed again. So this is a sense of norm, and it doesn't happen to anyone else that isn't of color. It's generally speaking the BAME community, especially Black people, and especially also Asians as well. And proactive policing, that's another thing that's quite dangerous because, again, when they don't find anything to incriminate someone, they decide to make things up. And I've got 3 examples, and I could even speak about stuff in my nearly 30 stop and searches over my life. There's quite a lot of things that have never happened and the police like to lie. I do think they need to be defunded. They're not using the resources properly. If this is what they're wasting time doing, and making up crimes, they just do need less numbers. And on top of that as well, in terms of obstruction, suspiciousness, evasiveness, these are things they make up. So whether in their eyes, if they want to say you're obstructive, you're being suspicious, you're being evasive, even if it doesn't make sense, they can make it up and the police can charge you for that over time. Again, flip that back to assault now. If you do that to a police officer or accidentally even brush them, they could do you for assault and arrest you. The same sort of energy needs to be used when police officers lie. When police officers are lying, they're under oath. So why are they getting away with it constantly? They're constantly lying and they get away with it. The same energy needs to be used as us if we were to accidentally even assault a police officer. Some of them clearly suffer with narcissistic personality disorder. Some of them clearly come into force with racist intentions. You could tell by the way they speak to you, the way they look at you before they stop you. A lot of this we've already explained culture when they're trying to justify stopping you. They say that a lot because they can't remember what they said to stop you, you know, and that's another problem with the BME community. And also there needs to be some sort of register, lying police register, like a racism register as well. Just like we have a sex offenders one for police officers doing this because they keep getting away with it. So yeah, it is quite distressing. Yeah, constantly in relation to this as well, police have constantly broken the COVID-19 regulations on pointless stop and searches. So this definitely does need to be looked at because the NHS is under a lot of stress. And you know, the Tory government have been atrocious at handling it. So yeah, a lot of this does need to be looked at.
Thank you very much for that, Ryan, and my apologies to have to cut you off, but you raise, I think, a lot of important points and a lot of useful points that people can follow up. So thanks again for joining us and contributing to the plenary. I'm quite pleased to announce our next speaker, who is an activist with All Black Lives Matter UK. So Maryam, I'm going to hand over to you.
So, hi, sorry guys, one sec. I'm just trying to put my video on. Hey guys, sorry. Yeah, so basically I'm going to speak to you guys a little bit about how the Black community has been affected by the pandemic. So like from discrimination to language, there are so many things that have impacted the vulnerability of the Black community. But yeah, it's not entirely understood, but there are some very obvious aspects of society and life that have had an influence. So the way the UK is, we find so much of our Black community in like, obviously lower income areas with less access to economic resources. And it's that economic vulnerability that often translates to poorer health outcomes. And also Black people are obviously disproportionately represented in at-risk professions. So for instance, 26.4% of TfL staff are from the BME community versus the 13% of obviously the whole general population of the UK. And people of colour are also substantially more likely to be unemployed or underemployed or precariously employed and things like that, which make them especially likely to take up these hazardous kind of temporary gigs and things like that. But yeah, so obviously Black people as well are just so underrepresented in higher positions in companies, even though there are so many people in the community that obviously qualify for those roles. And the Office for National Statistics reported that there is clear evidence that Black people are at higher risk of dying as well from COVID-19, so not just getting it. And like they published data showing that Black people were more than 4 times more likely to get it, and 4 times more likely to at higher risk, from dying of COVID as well. And some more statistics that I had found were that the Intensive Care National Audit and Research Centre showed us that 34% of COVID-related admissions to intensive care were for ethnic minorities, while again, they only account for 13% of the population of the UK. So I want to suggest 2 things basically that are kind of like potential ways to improve the situation and kind of help it. And those 2 things are obviously addressing the unconscious bias within the UK's healthcare system, because I really don't think that a lot of people want to believe that there is a disparity there, but the facts are facts and the evidence is there, and it's horrible and it needs to be addressed. And the second thing is to increase the level of financial support for unemployed and self-employed people. I think that I saw a statistic, I can't remember exactly what, so I won't say it, but the amount of people that get support from the government who are unable to work and things like that is just very, 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 very low for the Black community. And it's almost as if they just, they're just not, it's not being addressed, nothing's happening, nothing's changing. And yeah, so I think that we need to definitely bring more attention to those things, because they do have a really big effect on the pandemic as well, and the Black community catching the virus too. But yeah, guys, that's what I have to say about that.
Thank you so much, Maryam. Thank you so much. And I think you have raised some very, very good
Thank
points,
you.
and reminding us right now in this right moment where we're living in the pandemic have actually, shown what we always forever knew, but it seems like now a lot of people are kind of being more aware of it. And thank you so much for doing so. And thank you for joining us today as well. I'm going to be introducing our next speaker, Weyman Bennett. He's the co-convener of Stand Up to Racism. Weyman, you're here?
I'm here. Just want to dedicate this conference to Colette Levy, who I've just left, a Holocaust survivor, and to her sister Nicole, who died this year, 3 months ago. And she'll be on in a moment. And I want to say that it's either scapegoating or struggle. The Taki rebellion that took place in Antigua, which was to get rid of the masters, kill the masters, they said, is the basis of part of the reason the slave rebellions on Black History Month that we should remember. That's the tradition that we stand in. The change that took place was because of Toussaint Louverture, because Black people and white people fought against slavery, but the slaves themselves fought. And I want to remember that in Black History Month. I think the three things that we have to stand up and be honest about is that our government doesn't care about the impact of COVID on any community, but disproportionately it hits Black communities. That's why I want to support Diane Abbott and Bell Ribeiro calling for a public inquiry into why there's been disproportionate deaths. There's disproportionate deaths because, as been said before, the £12 billion that's been distributed by this government has been distributed only in the favour of the rich and the powerful. We have to decolonise our society. We have to make sure that we're kept safe. And the key question that we have to say is that if we are to be kept safe and there is to be zero COVID, then our schools, our universities, we can't have a double system where you're allowed to go to work, you're allowed to not have the safety, but you're told that all that matters is that that system carries on. I think we have to turn around and say that our government has never cared about it. Look at Dominic Cummings, a man that says he tested his eyesight out by driving up for hundreds of miles, yet at the same time demanding extra conditions be placed on different communities. And I believe that the Black community in particular, in terms of the deaths that have taken place, we have to hold these people responsible for that. I think the question of looking at what the police are doing, I want to thank the previous speakers for talking about disproportionate stop and searches. Black people make up 8% of the people, make up 3% of the people stopped by the police accordingly, and 8% of the deaths in custody. Look what happened to Sean Rigg. Look what happened, look what happened to Christopher Alder, and so many names. This campaign for Black Lives Matter was started with the murder of George Floyd, a mass movement across the world. And we have to make sure this is not a moment, this is a movement. And that's part of the reason why Stand Up to Racism is calling on to make sure that Section 60 is scrapped. And part of that is part of the reason why we're going to be marching for UN Anti-Racism Day, because it is an internationalist movement. We have to give solidarity to our brothers and sisters inside the United States. President Trump is a scumbag. He's a racist, a white supremacist, and it's important that we stand out against him and oppose him. And I think whatever happens, we know that he's not going to accept that he should be kicked out of the White House. He deserves to be kicked out of the White House, but he says he's not going to do that. He's going to unleash the militias on those communities that stand up and resist him. And that's why we have to show solidarity. The good news is that in Greece, Golden Dawn was defeated by the anti-racist and anti-fascist forces. A force that they said couldn't be defeated was defeated. This is in a country devastated by economic crisis, that has large numbers of refugees coming here. Look what the government's doing to refugees now. It's talking about unleashing the Navy to go in the English Channel, not to save people, but they say to prevent people from moving from one place to the other. There are 65 million refugees in the world. Britain doesn't even take the children. The Dubs Amendment was never enacted. The cruelty, the viciousness put forward by our government isn't to help people, it's to misdirect people, it's to blame the wrong people. I just want to say that Frederick Douglass said that they use division to conquer both and divide both. And I think that we have to understand that we stand in that tradition of resistance and change. Please join Stand Up to Racism. The people that lead this movement are the people that took the knee, took to the streets in the BLM movement. We're the leadership of it. And this is not a moment. We have to say to those people who think that we're going to go away, we will never accept any form of racism, Islamophobia, and anti-Semitism. We have to stand together in unity and fight back. I'll stop there. Solidarity and unity to everyone.
Thanks very much for that, Weyman. And I think you're absolutely right when you say that we're faced with a choice between scapegoating and struggle. I'm really glad to announce that we have over 500 people watching across Facebook and YouTube. So please keep sharing, whether that's the Facebook link, whether that's the YouTube live stream, what have you. We want as many people to be joining as possible. And Diane Abbott will be joining us much later as well. So please do keep sharing. I'm pleased to announce our next speaker, who is Kevin Courtney. Kevin is the National Education Union Joint General Secretary. So Kevin, over to you.
Thank you very much, and thanks very much for the invitation to be here at this international conference, Stand Up to Racism. Because it's international, I thought I would just talk about 3 different examples from Greece, from the history of the US, and from the UK. And what I want to emphasize in what I'm saying is that we need to organize. So the example from Greece is the one that other people have spoken about. The fact that Golden Dawn, who were regarded by the far right worldwide as a leading example, an organization that managed to combine, a neo-Nazi organization that managed to combine some degree of parliamentary success in the Greek parliament with quite a lot of success on the streets of building a Nazi brown shirt type movement. They were doing both of those. The fact that they were defeated in that court case last week, have been found a criminal enterprise. Lots of their leaders are going to go to jail, hopefully for a long time. It's a big step forward for our movement. But what I want to say is it's really important to know that it was organized for. It hasn't happened by accident. There were lawyers giving their time, progressive lawyers from the movement, giving their time for free to the case. There were campaigning journalists doing research to help the lawyers, and there was a mass movement. That defeat for Golden Dawn and the far right came because our side organized. And the example I want to talk about in the US is the example of Rosa Parks that we talk about in schools an awful lot. But when I first became aware of Rosa Parks, I thought she was a little old lady who was really brave and did something on the bus and really didn't get the history of it. She wasn't an old lady. She was a young woman. She was very brave, but it wasn't an accident. She was part of a movement that had set itself up in order to break the bus boycott. And I think it's really important that we talk about things in that way. Rosa Parks was predated by Claudette Colville, who stood up, who did the same thing on a bus, by Aurelia Browder, who did the same thing and then took a case against the bus company and won. But despite the fact that she won in court, it still was desegregation of the buses still didn't happen. Rosa Parks then did it, was brave in that way, was part of the movement, had been trained by progressive political parties, by progressives in the church movement. So it's all trained up for, and then following her doing that, Joanne Robinson created 52,000 leaflets to build for the boycott. So it was always organized for. And I think that really matters in the way you think about what we do in this country, because in this country, we've done great things. We got rid of the BNP from Bergen and Dagenham, and that wasn't an accident either. It took real organization. It took many of us to go down there. I only went a few times giving out leaflets, but hundreds of people went and gave out leaflets on the door knocking in Bergen and Dagenham. But that was organized by the movement. And I want to say it was organized by Stand Up to Racism. So Stand Up to Racism organised the work that got rid of the BNP from Bergen and Dagenham and from the rest of the country. Stand Up to Racism organised the street mobilisations against the English Defence League, which has made our country that little bit better. There's lots more to do in that area, but I'm really pleased that my union supports Stand Up to Racism, because we need organisation of the movement against racism. We need brave people, we need people with skills, but we also need to organise for it. So I'm really pleased to be on this call talking about that right now. My union, the National Education Union, it's the fourth biggest union in the country. It's the biggest education union in Europe. And I like to say, I think you can't be a good teacher unless you're an anti-racist. And so my union, I hope, is doing its best to fight racism in the school system, where you find it in all sorts of ways, but inside the union and inside our society, supporting Stand Up to Racism. We are trying to organise to decolonise the curriculum, and we've got hundreds of people, volunteers, working on doing that. We want to decolonise the exam system, which is a very discriminatory exam system that we have in this country. So I'm really pleased to be here today, pleased to be working with everybody on this platform. Speakers so far have been absolutely fantastic. Thank you very much to Stand Up to Racism for all the work you're doing. If you're watching this and you're not a member, then please do join, and let's all work together to end the scourge of racism in our society. Thanks very much.
Oh God, it was hard to unmute myself. Thank you so much, Kevin. I think you said something that is very important, which is like, you can't be a teacher unless you are anti-racist. And as someone that has was part of the student movement still a little bit, I think it's very, very important. Solidarity between teachers and students is fundamentally, that's what will change the education system. So thank you so much for being here and speaking here. Please do remember, as Nadia said, we have 500 people, over 500 people watching us over Facebook and YouTube. People, please keep sharing your comments, keep engaging. So Carlos says, hi, I'm new here. Finally, I have found a channel that shares my same political views. So this is what we're doing. So thank you and welcome, Carlos, for joining this amazing movement. I'm going to be introducing our next speaker, which is Mina Agyepong. Mina's house was raided by police after her child was seen playing with a Nerf gun. So, Mina.
Hi, thank you for inviting me to speak. I'm really pleased to be here. And for those that don't know me, yes, my name is Mina Agyepong, and I am the mother of Kai, who's a 12-year-old boy. You may have heard in the press, was held at gunpoint and arrested in his own home on July 17th, all because he was playing with a toy gun in his home. So it was a Friday evening, and a passerby, as you can see my window at the back, was walked past and would have come into my gate, peered through my window, and would have seen my son sitting behind me. And, you know, he had his toy gun. That passerby then reported it to the police, and the police showed up about half an hour later with what I can only describe as a sting operation. It wasn't following up inquiries, as the police have sort of explained they was doing. They came full force, about 30 officers, at least half of them was from SCO 19, who were the specialist arms unit of the Metropolitan Police. They had semi-automatic rifles, guns that you have two hands to hold, red laser beams, and they burst into my house. My son was terrified. They had me, my son, my two other daughters, who's 22 and 16, held us at gunpoint with our hands up. And one by one, we was held at gunpoint out into the street. But Kai was led away initially and arrested. So I had no idea where he was taken, if he was being arrested, taken to the police station. He was led away. He was handcuffed. And he had no top on because it was late at night. He was at home relaxing, no shoes on, and was taken away. Myself and my girls were led out one by one, taken into the street. And for about half an hour, the police proceeded to search my house, even though the toy gun would have been visible on display in my living room, which is downstairs. They went to every floor, raided my house, even went to my loft, and obviously didn't find, what they was looking for. Left the toy gun, which is important to remember. They left the toy gun at my house because it's not an illegal firearm. It's not a replica firearm. It's perfectly legal to have them in your home. They had sniffer dogs. They had 2 ambulances on standby. As of before, they had about 30 officers. And SO19 aren't just regular police. They're police that look like military soldiers. They have
Hey, Mina, sorry, we have lost you there. Oh, wow. This is one of our Zoom nightmares.
when I spoke to the police,
Hi, Mina. Sorry, we have lost you there.
it's more about the fact that it was a black male.
All right. Unfortunately, Mina's obviously having technical difficulties and issues with her connection, which is quite a shame. Because I think this is an important story to know in challenging, the racism we see from the police and the state and so on. So hopefully we can get Mina back at some stage later. But I suppose we've also got to move forward. We have still quite a few speakers to hear from, and also we'll be hearing from Diane Abbott much later. But I suppose to bring in our next speaker, we have Lawrence Davies. Lawrence is a solicitor from Equal Justice and is involved in the case for Belly Mujinga. So Lawrence, I'm happy to hand over to you.
Thank you. I act for the family of Belly Mujinga. Last week, we wrote to the Prime Minister calling for public inquiry into Belly's avoidable and tragic death. If you're interested, a copy of our letter to the PM and more details about Belly's case can be found at our Equal Justice Solicitor's website. The harsh working life and tragic death of Belly Mujinga serves as a microcosm for racism in the UK. For context, all of the British social attitude surveys in recent years show that 25% of the British public admit to being very or a little racist. So it follows that up to 25% of your work colleagues may be biased in the way they make decisions or treat BAME workers. In short, there are over 1 million incidents of racism at work every year. That's 8 racial incidents at work every working minute. 8 every minute. To make matters worse, based on all indicators, racism has been on the rise and has been increasingly overt since the Brexit campaign. In 2017, the TUC produced a report, I suspect ironically, Is Racism Real? It found that 37% of BAME staff suffered race discrimination at work and 16% suffered harassment at work. This year, the TUC produced another report entitled Dying in the Job, not ironic, which found that twice the level of BAME staff were suffering harassment at work compared to 2017. It also found that 15% of the harassed staff left their jobs as a result of that harassment. But while racial harassment has doubled at work from 2017 to 2020, regrettably, the ability to obtain justice for that harassment remains out of reach. In fact, only 43% of victims of racism report back to their employer, and 99% of them lose their race grievances. So the harsh truth is that only 1% of race victims formally complain about racism at work, and only 1 to 2% of those win their claims at the tribunal. So the small percentage that win seldom receive adequate compensation. The highest award for racism at work last year was about £30,000. Tribunal awards are often pitifully low, and they definitely don't financially deter racism at work. On a more positive note, anti-discrimination work has more recently had and continues to have the benefit of the Me Too movement and Black Lives Matter movement. The question then is for us today, have these movements made a difference to outcomes in the UK? And the answer is sadly no, or not yet. For context, before Me Too in the US, only 6% of victims of sexual harassment formally complained about that conduct. After they raised a litigation fund of $20 million, they achieved a 10% formal complaint rate, an increase of about 4%. In the UK, believe it or not, only 1% of sexual harassment victims formally complained before Me Too, and only 1% complain of sexual harassment post Me Too, because we don't have a litigation fund. It means in practice today, 99% of all discriminatory incidents that happen at work are never formally challenged, which means a discriminatory situation at work doesn't change and isn't likely to. So it's in that context, is it really any surprise that when Belly and her Black African work colleague Motolani had suffered racial abuse from customers on concourse of Victoria Station, are we surprised that happened? Is it really any surprise that Belly herself was suffering racial discrimination at work and being harassed by her supervisor prior to the assault? On the 10th of February 2020, Belly issued a race grievance against her supervisor, but her employer, Govia Thameslink, appears to have ignored it. Her supervisor did not ignore it and retaliated against her. It's important to note Belly wasn't on the road to work outside on the concourse at Victoria Station on the 21st of March, the day on which she was assaulted. She was supposed to be working in the ticket office. She was forced to work outside by that supervisor about whom she'd complained of racism and who also knew of Belly's health conditions. Belly wasn't given a mask or adequate PPE, and she'd been told she couldn't use her own mask outside. After being assaulted, the supervisor and manager forced Belly to work outside again for several hours on the concourse, even though she begged not to. Days later, Belly developed COVID symptoms. It was only after a medical consultant, though, contacted Govia demanding that she be shielded, that the employer agreed that she should shield and need not attend work. And this is important. Govia never reported a coughing, spitting COVID incident to the police. And that meant that vital DNA and CCTV evidence was lost because of a delay. Belly tragically died on the 5th of April 2020, and it appears that her Black life did not matter. A few months after Belly died, her supervisor, about whom she had complained of racism, allegedly told staff, "Only stupid people die of COVID." Belly was the main breadwinner in her family and earned about £25,000 a year. She's a frontline worker who was part of our private-run public rail service. She worked for a business which in 2019 recorded 1.8 billion in revenue. However, Belly's employer did not provide her with proper PPE, did not address the racism at work she suffered, and did not inform the police about the assaults on her on 21st of March. Being in low-paid work, Belly had less power. It's important to recognise that BAME workers disproportionately work within the low-wage economy. You probably all know that women workers are paid 18% less than men. What you should also know is BAME workers are probably paid 37% less than white workers, although a study last week suggested the figure for London-based BAME workers was 24%. I personally did a case where the difference, the BAME pay gap was 90%. But to understand the scale of unequal pay, you must consider the Birmingham City case. In that case, tens of thousands of low-paid women who worked as carers, cleaners and cooks sued Birmingham City Council for equal pay for equal value of work against binmen and street cleaners. They won 1,200 million in compensation. That's 1.2 billion. So society says women are doing well and there's only an 18% pay difference. The reality is that the actual public sector equal pay debt owed to women workers is about 140 billion pounds. So if you paid 140 billion pounds to public sector women workers today, then they could wake up tomorrow morning still being 18% behind in pay for that day's work, but the 140 billion pounds of wealth transfer would radically change their lives and improve gender equality. The total equal pay debt owed to women today is about £1 trillion and rising. It is likely that the BAME equal pay debt is up to £300 billion in total. If you transfer that £300 billion currently due to BAME workers today, then tomorrow we can realistically talk about eradicating the BAME pay gap going forward. We will have taken our first real steps towards race equality at work. But until then, while that 300 billion is withheld, we remain decades away from race equality at work. And with unequal and lower pay, life is harder on every level, from financial security to healthcare, to housing quality, to education, to the amount of influence you have, and whether or not you're heard, or whether your life matters. The 300 billion pounds, of course, doesn't begin to address the psychological damage done to black workers by race discrimination. Okay. The government will probably say they can't afford race equality at work, but the reality is we've just committed £1 trillion of public funds to tackle the COVID pandemic. So it's affordable if race equality has the same priority as the COVID pandemic. We need race equality at work now. Please support the public inquiry for Belly. Please also sign our petition seeking justice at Belly, for Belly, at change.org. Thank you for your time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lawrence, for sharing the history, the story of Belly. And please do share, do join the campaign and do sign the petition, and please do get in touch with them. Mina I've had some technical issues earlier, but we're going to take her back. Looks like everything is fine now.
Yes, I'm really sorry about that. Yeah, Wi-Fi wasn't so good. But yeah, just for the benefit of those that may have joined, you know, my name's Mina. I'm the mother of Kai, who's my son, 12-year-old boy, who was held at gunpoint and arrested in his home by the Metropolitan Police Service for playing with a toy gun. And this was an unsubstantiated report from a member of the public that was passing by my window here from the street, who called the police to say they heard a black male holding a gun. The police came to my house about half an hour later, full force, with about 30 officers from SCO 19, which is the armed force of the Metropolitan Police Service. And they came with guns, you know, red light beams, the kind of guns you have like two hands to hold, huge guns, and was traumatizing my son, who's just 12 years old. He was led away, arrested, taken to a police car. I didn't know that at the time. And the police proceeded to arrest my son and raid my house. They had sniffer dogs. They had 2 ambulances on standby. And, you know, me and my family, my daughters who were 23 and 16, all led out in the middle of the night and had to wait in the street while this happened. So even though they would have found the toy gun in the living room quite early on in the raid, they still proceeded to raid my house because they wanted to find something that was illegal, which they didn't find. You know, so my son, who's 12, has had that negative and traumatic interaction with the police, which is not rare for young Black boys. As we know, young Black boys are systemically and disproportionately targeted with stop and search. They're more likely to have handcuffs being used when being arrested for very low level crimes. Section 60, which was mentioned earlier before, a disproportionate effect on BAME communities, particularly young Black men. Police deaths in custody. I mean, the list goes on. And this is not just my opinion, this is facts that the Metropolitan Police Service themselves publish their reports every month. So it's for anybody to read. So my son, I feel, at 12, has already been criminalized. He's a law-abiding, very normal, regular little 12-year-old boy who now has the memory and experience of being held at gunpoint in his home with his family, even though he did nothing wrong, nothing wrong. There's children up and down the country who play with toy guns. Toy guns have been being played with by children, you know, for decades. If you Google Prince George and Kate Middleton, you'll see pictures of Prince George playing with toy guns. But the point is, even though it sparked this national debate on the internet about the merits of whether children should play with toy guns or not, I ask you to think about this, that although the toy gun is relevant, it's immaterial, because if my son hadn't had that toy gun and someone else had still reported that they thought they'd seen a male in my house with a toy gun, would the police response have been any different? And the fact is it wouldn't have been, because they wouldn't have known what was in my house. They would have still brought literally that excessive kind of cavalry that they brought. It was like a scene from a movie, as if there was no doubt that there must have been an illegal firearms in my house, when actually all it was a toy gun. And I think that in terms of the discrimination, I think that my son has experienced, which is clearly stereotyping police by racism, and it needs to stop, and it's been going on for forever, as highlighted earlier in the talk. And for me, as the mother of a young Black boy, I can tell you that, you know, I've got concerns obviously about living in London, you know, the hysteria around, you know, gang crime and gang violence and things like that. But from my point of view, the biggest gang is the Metropolitan Police Force. And the biggest threat to young Black boys is the Metropolitan Police, and that needs to stop. And Cressida Dick needs to acknowledge that there is systemic racism within her force. 20 years on from the Macpherson inquiry, little has changed in that respect. Just go onto their website and have a look at the statistics for yourself. Black men are targeted daily, and my son was a victim of one of the hardest stop and searches. He was at home, not doing anything at all, but yet he almost lost his life because he was playing with a toy gun. So thank you for inviting me to speak, and really, really, you know, thankful for being here and being part of this movement, and just keep up, you know, the good work that you're doing, and thanks for listening to my story.
Thank you so much, Mina, for joining us and sharing your story with you. You just stated, you said everything a Black mother biggest fear out here, having a young Black boy in London or in the UK, in the West. So thank you so much for sharing your story with us. Please keep sharing the link for on YouTube and on Facebook and with your friends and family. We have an amazing lineup of speakers coming up. Diane Abbott will be speaking soon, and other amazing speakers. I'm going to be introducing our next speaker, which is Roger McKenzie. Roger is Unison Assistant General Secretary.
Thank you, Maryam, for the introduction, and thanks everybody. Just listening to the stories that we've heard so far, and the stories that I've no doubt we're going to hear as this conversation continues, it's no wonder that we have to assert that Black Lives Matter, because frankly, we have so much evidence that to too many people in this country, Black lives don't matter. And when they say to us, yeah, but what about all lives? What about our lives? Well, we've never said that all lives don't matter, but right now, the important thing is that people understand that we are under attack as Black people, not just in this country, but across the world. There are two pandemics taking place at the moment. There's the COVID-19 pandemic, and there's the pandemic of racism, which has been going on for a number of years. It's been going on for so long now that I can't even put a date on it. And when people say, yeah, but you need to assert this thing of all lives matter, well, let's put it this way. If my house was burning down and I turn to a neighbour and I say to that neighbour, my house is burning down, I don't expect them to say, yeah, but what about my house? I expect them to help me to put out that fire. And that's what we are saying to people in this country now. We are saying to them, our house is burning. We need your support. We need your solidarity, because you beat racism, not with racism. You beat racism with solidarity. You beat racism by standing collectively up together. And this is where one of the many points that Kevin Courtney made earlier on that is so right. It's so right that we can't wish for this stuff to go away. We can't just hope that racism goes away. We can't just think that out of the goodness of somebody's heart that one day they're going to wake up and think, you know, all these things I've been doing in your workplace, all these things I've been doing in the community, you know, I think that was wrong and I'm not going to do it anymore. Doesn't work that way. Actually, the thing that makes a difference is us. We have to stand up and we have to organize, because for too long, we've had this thing where too many people in workplaces, too many people in the trade union movement, too many people who call themselves politicians are making judgments about whether or not they can get away with saying something or nothing or very little. And frankly, those days, if they were ever right, have long gone. those days are way gone. We have to assert with people that we demand that they walk by the side of us as anti-racist, that they don't hide behind excuses like, oh, my best friend's black, or that somebody they met 20 years ago is black, or that they like West Indian cricket, or they like reggae music or something. You know, those days are rubbish. People have to stop making excuses and start living for their actions. We've got so many reports about racism in this country. We've got so many books that have been written about the reports. We've got films being written about the books of the reports. Too much. We demand change, and we demand it now, but we have to force that change to happen. And those people who do not, or will not, or cannot bring about that change because they're in positions of authority, then we have to sweep them aside. We have to make sure that they move out of the way, because the time must change. The times must change. There can't be any more time for excuses. There can't be any more time for people to carry their anti-racism like it's the latest fashion. They wear their Black Lives Matters badge. They put Black Lives Matters in the wall. They even take a knee for George Floyd, and then they'll turn around and then they'll sack a load of black workers and re-engage them on worse terms and conditions like they've done in Tower Hamlets. Unacceptable. You're either anti-racist or you're against us. And that is what we have to say to people. So we demand change, we demand action, but we have to be the ones to force that change to happen. So I've seen too much of people making these excuses. I've seen too much of people discovering their anti-racism just in time because there's a Black Lives Matter movement. And suddenly Black Lives Matter is important now, and because they haven't been listening to all of the things that we have been saying, not just in the last year, but we have been saying for decades now about the impact of racism on our lives, in our communities, and in our workplaces. So I say this to you, I don't want to go back to the days, and I don't want anybody to have to go back to the days where I had to fight my way to school every morning and fight my way in school to get a decent education, and then fight my way back home in the evening just to find our house had been daubed with racist slogans, or to sit in our house and have dog mess thrown through our letterbox or petrol bombs thrown through our letterbox, because that is the reality of what is going on now. Comrades and friends, we have to stand up. Enough is enough. We have to force the change, and we have to force the change now. No more excuses. It's time for change. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much for that, Roger. And I think you're absolutely right. It has to be us that forces the change in society. And actually, when you were speaking, you know, what you were saying really reminded me of that often remembered quote from Angela Davis, where she says, it's not enough just not to be a racist, but you have to be proactively an anti-racist. So thank you very much for that. I suppose just to read out some messages from people at home. Z says, thank you for speaking, Mina, eternal solidarity. And Gerard says, brilliant contribution, Roger, as does Rhoda, who says, good speech, Roger, totally agree. Please keep sending in your comments and thoughts and so on. We want you to be part of the discussion. We have over 500 people watching on YouTube and Facebook, but we want more, so please keep sharing and sending the live stream out. We still have some way to go through this plenary, but I'm pleased to introduce our next speaker, who is Fawzia Kadia. Fawzia is the Education Officer at Goldsmiths University for Goldsmiths Student Union. So Fawzia, I'm going to hand over to you.
Thank you so much. Hi, firstly, I'd like to give my warm hellos to everyone who's joining us and everyone on the panel today, and a huge thank you to everyone who's organised this weekend. My name is Fawzia, my pronouns are she, her, and I'm the current education officer at Goldsmiths Student Union. I was democratically elected to represent students along with 3 of my colleagues, and most of the work that I've been doing the past few months has been mitigating the severe and detrimental impacts that COVID has brought to new and returning students on my campus. I wanted to cover what we've seen in universities and what these impacts have been, and homing particularly on the impacts of Black and minority students, and why now more than ever the abolition of our corrupt education system is absolutely necessary. Pre-pandemic has seen universities criticised for their handling of racism and the lack of racial justice. There have been cries for universities to take the lives of Black students into the forefront of their planning and their teaching, and that it's not enough to no longer be racist, that universities need to establish themselves as anti-racist. The collision of Black History Month and the return of students on campus has only highlighted the deep faults in our education system. The end of September saw the return of millions of students to universities under the new government guidelines, despite warnings that putting hundreds of students in university accommodations for months would be bad for their health. The Union of Lecturers called what we would see as the care home of the second wave, and the last few weeks have proven their statements to be true. Students have begun exhibiting COVID symptoms and testing positives, and many of which have been forced into self-isolations in small rooms to attend classes completely online. The prediction of what would happen when students returned was not an exaggeration of the worst case scenarios. It was a display of the realities of our societies in the time of COVID. And yet governments and colleges across the UK chose to prioritize money and health over the welfare of students. The fight for racial equality that was seen in my university started by Goldsmiths Anti-Racist Action, which occupied one of our university buildings for 137 days, which to fight for racial justice was seen to completely disappear, and the terrible handling of the pandemic and of students in halls has overtaken any work that needed to be done. So where does that bring us? In the past few weeks alone, students in our halls have been learning that they are COVID positive, and an overwhelming majority of them have been asymptomatic. And has there been any communication from the universities? Not enough to ease the worries of students, and I'm not surprised. The responsibility has fallen on students who I've seen organising group chats and offering each other mutual aid. And while there is so much to be proud of, when did the responsibility to decline the spread of COVID fall on students' shoulders? Students who were encouraged to pack up and move across the countries, pay for halls, sign up for student loans, all to be essentially locked into tiny box rooms. There is already a lack of testing available for people, and not providing students tests means that they're not able to decide to leave and their tenancies or defer their studies. Black students have had to shoulder the impact of COVID and attending university, coming off the recent climate of Black Lives Matter movement sparked by the shootings and killings of Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, and Belly Mujinga. Many Black people and hundreds of protests and the growing abolition and defunding movement of police. Black students have had to go back to inherently violent university spaces where the fight for racial justice is still ongoing and racial inequality is very lacking. When I was a student, I was fighting my university for racial justice, working on decolonizing education, as well as fighting to graduate, knowing that the BME attainment gap was very large. I don't even want to imagine what it must feel like to be doing all of this right now from my own room with minimal support and an inability to meet with my peers to organize. And the impact of COVID goes further than Black students. The majority of cleaners and security staff at Goldsmiths are BAME workers. Goldsmiths University is situated in Lewisham, which is also a majority BME. The senior management in our university has not taken this into consideration, has not taken their lives into considerations. Students have had to warn workers where COVID are, and PPE is not adequate. And as much as we warn students not to go out into pubs and bars, the Tory government is pushing these recreational activities, and it's hard to shield the wider community from COVID. The anger and frustration that being in my position has brought me, and listening to being a student representative and listening to many student testimonies has transformed my look into higher education in the UK and fueled my determination to work towards the abolition of our current education system, a system which overcharges and is still unable to provide for BME students. It is not enough to rely on universities and governments to acknowledge and put ahead the needs of Black and minority students. It falls on us as organisers, as Black and minority students, lecturers, to work towards abolishing curriculums, buildings, teachings that the government decides to fund. The current pandemic has moved students and organisers to reimagine the types of education we want to see in our future, the types of support, equality that is necessary to allow young people to grow. And I am hopeful and ready to be a part of this movement. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Fauzia. You have highlighted very important point, which is solidarity between workers, students is the only way forward we can get change and systematical change in our university, in our colleges, and in our society, in our community. Thank you so much. I'm gonna please keep sharing the link so we can get more people. We have over 500 people on Facebook and YouTube. So yeah, keep sharing the link, and we want more people. Keep interacting with comments. Moria said says, let's not forget about the institutional racism that led to loss of 72 lives in Grenfell Tower. Join us on Tuesday at 12:30 at the public inquiry of Bishop Bridge Road, Paddington. So yes, please do remember Grenfell, and please, if you can, do join the public inquiry. Without further ado, I'm going to take our next speaker, Talha Ahmad. Talha is from the Muslim Council of Britain.
Hi everyone, Assalamu alaikum, and it's great to be with you here today. It gives me great pleasure to join you, albeit from the comfort of my own home. Where do you begin? The challenge is huge and multifaceted. And what's depressing about it is that every institution that is empowered to make our society more enlightened, make our society more equal, make our society more representative and diverse, the institutions which are supposed to empower us, protect us and safeguard our interest, almost all of them appear to have problems. Fawzia talked about universities and the challenges that students face as a result of inconsiderate policies of the university. Perhaps some of it is motivated by, if not an explicit racism, but certainly an inability to understand or appreciate the impact of their decisions within the racial community. We heard from, for example, Mina earlier, police and the ordeal her family and her young son had to go through. And Kevin highlighted the challenges that we face in schools. So whether it's NHS, whether it's police forces, whether it's universities, schools, everywhere we have huge challenges to face. But echoing other speakers, it is on us to be the agent of change, and we will do that. Kevin said earlier how describing the challenge posed by Golden Dawn and what it means, from the decision that we've seen, which found Golden Dawn MPs guilty, that it was the result of organizing. So to echoing that, the challenge is great, but we will rise to that challenge and we will force change and we will be the agent of change. I want to specifically focus on Islamophobia. Islamophobia is within the broad umbrella of racism. Many Muslims face racism, but they face triple. If you take Muslim women, for example, they suffer because most of them are from BME communities. So they are the victim of racism. They're victim of Islamophobia. They're victim of misogyny and so forth. So, and also the Muslims are about a third of the BME population. So what affects the BME population affects Muslim. What affects Muslim affects the BME population. And it's sad to see that the Islamophobia has permeated into government policymaking in the most shameful and most depressing manner. We are familiar about how ripe racism, Islamophobia is within the Conservative Party. And you will know that Muslim Council of Britain has been consistently articulating with evidence, raising specific allegation against specific people at various stages of Conservative leadership, and how the government and the governing party has been unwilling to even acknowledge, let alone take that challenge. And what's depressing is that, unfortunately, it's not just one particular party or one particular section of the society which seems to have this problem. Only recently, for example, allegations were raised about some councillors, Labour councillors in Neham, about certain comments they have made and their conduct, whether it amounts to Islamophobia. Only last week or the week before, we have seen, for example, the first female Somali councillor express concern that whether her treatment may have roots in Islamophobia within some elements of the Labour councillors in Islington. And I had stories. So the point I'm making, I suppose, is this: that this challenge is not posed to us just from one section of the community, or one section of the political elites or one particular political parties and so on. It is a challenge that is presented to us in varying degrees. Some do so more than others, but in varying degrees, it comes from a whole range of people. But time is always an issue, so I will try and sum it up. But one thing I want to say is this: our hate, our challenge, our issue that we take with those hate mongers should not compel us to find in sympathy with others who may also equally peddle hatred and racism and Islamophobia. And there are many cases in point, but one particular one I really want to mention is the plight in China, the Uyghur population. We as a movement must always rise against all form of hatred, and we will not tolerate, whether it's Islamophobia, racism, anti-Black racism, anti-Semitism, homophobia, whatever it is. Our commitment must be for fight against hatred and Islamophobia and racism wherever and whoever it comes from. Comrades, we will continue that fight, and we will bring change, and we will be that agent of change. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Talha, and I think you're absolutely right. We need unity, and we need for people to come together and unite to fight racism that's so deeply ingrained in society and such a poison in society. So thank you so much for that. I just wanted to announce again that some way through the plenary at the moment. Diane Abbott will still be joining us later, so do stick around, share on Twitter and what have you. But I'm excited to announce our next speaker, who is Fiona Sim. Fiona is a Chinese anti-racist activist who is part of the successful Goldsmiths anti-racist occupation. So a big welcome to Fiona.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been great just to hear from everyone about their different experiences throughout this pandemic to do with the racism that's been experienced, whether it's Islamophobia, anti-Blackness, and also how as within our different institutions, whether it's the school, the university, or the workplace, how it's been a constant uphill battle to even get things such as PPE. Well, I'm a graduate as well of Goldsmiths, as was Auzia. And what I found during the anti-racist occupation of one of the buildings at Goldsmiths was that what was very important because of that occupation was we came together not just as, a bunch of allies, but predominantly Black and brown students of BAME students who came together to fight racism. And this was of great intimidation to the university because they were at that point only used to protests, occupations and campaigns that were primarily led by white students, white allies, for example. And that's not to say not to degrade the activism that they're doing, but specifically when you are Black or brown, when you are someone in the BAME community, when you are organizing, it can be very intimidating to white-led institutions that you are fighting for your rights. And this is something that I feel like has sort of been played out throughout the pandemic. It's when, the Black Lives Matter movement was at its peak during the early summer, spring period. There was a lot of intimidation faced by protesters out in the streets who are being shunned, who are being told that, that they're risking everybody's lives by doing so, when in actual fact, if you look at the statistics, it is Black and brown people around the country who are the frontline key workers, who are putting their lives at risk every day, who are putting every protection in place, despite their workplaces not caring to safeguard their families, their friends, and their communities. And something that also came out of this was obviously mutual aid networks. And I feel like this was incredibly important for BAME communities within the UK, because it just meant that we were able to rely on each other, not just as, as units in the society, but as a collective, as a whole, as community. And this is something I feel that's very missing in today's sort of society and, British culture in general. There's a sense of isolation where people feel some type of way about reaching out to others or being able to receive help from others. So I feel like this pandemic has really shown what solidarity and community can really do. And something I just still also wanted to touch upon was on the international front. I think it's very important during this time that we take an internationalist standpoint in everything that we do. We can see from countries such as Cuba to China to Senegal to Venezuela, these countries, despite being on the forefront of imperialist aggression, of being sanctioned, of not having the same level of good quality infrastructure that perhaps countries in the West may have, they have still been able to provide mutual aid and support to each other during these times. So for example, Cuba sent, I think it was something like 52 medical brigades workers to Italy at the height of their pandemic. China, for example, they have been sending multiple medical supplies to countries across the global south. And this is done on the basis not of charity, not of helplessness, not of, a white savior mentality, but of the mentality that it's so important that we must stick together. We must have solidarity with each other, no matter where we are in the world, because at the end of the day, if we don't fight imperialism, if we don't fight racism on all of its front, on all of its colonial elements, then we are so much more weaker for it. And thank you again for having me.
Thank you so much, Fiona, for those empowering words. Solidarity is the only way forward. Fighting imperialism, capitalism, and racism is always firm, is the only way forward. And then, as we said, this conference has been an international conference. I've had the contribution of a lot of speakers. Now we're going to be taking a video of Colette Levi.
My name is Colette Levy. I'm a survivor of the Second World War Nazi victim. My father died in a concentration camp. I was hiding with my twin, Nicole, who died 3 months ago. I thank you because I understand you're dedicating your conference to my sister. It's very touching. And I feel like crying, I tell you. And I'm sorry that, how I survived is a very incredible story, but it's a long story because we were hiding in a village outside Poitiers, below the Loire Valley, with my twin, with people we didn't even know. It was terrible. 6 years of age, and we were shipped on a train with no mother, nobody. The two of us on a train. It was crazy. And we spent the whole length of, from 42, we went there in the summer of 1942 and stayed there till 45 at the end of the war. And it was incredible. I mean, the place where we were was a small village which escaped being burnt with the people in the church, like me and the old people of the village. And the men on the cattle field were going to be shot because the Nazis had stolen gold, the gold that they got from our teeth when they killed us, yeah? And it was a terrible story, I tell you. But the commandant of that battalion, it was the Wehrmacht, and he had been a prisoner of the French during the First World War, and he had so-called be well treated. So after 6 hours of debating with our teachers, who were from Alsace-Lorraine originally and spoke perfect German, he saw the light and he decided to move, because he was told that the resistance was so strong that it was the end of the war. They were going to be shot at the end so there was no point killing again another the population of that village. So after 6 hours of debating, they left the village. But it was incredible. They occupied our place, our houses. And I remember my sister and we used to go into the attic and hide in a trunk but obviously eventually we had to come down to eat, etc., had to go to bed. And this, one of them was, it was a summer, he put a chair outside the house and he put my sister on his knees, and she played a game, and he said, "Oh, look, I have children too," and that more or less I don't agree with this. He was not a hardened Nazi. He was just people who couldn't escape being enrolled in that army. So finally they left the village and we were not killed. So that's the whole story, really. After that we came back to Paris, and there was nothing special. We went to a French lycée, one of the best in Paris, luckily for us, with all the general's daughters locally living there and coming to that college. What I'm telling you is that we have to be very vigilant. It never stops. And anti-Semitism, of course, racism, or, you know, against everybody, Islamophobia, and all these nasty diseases, really, we have to fight back all the time, because they're not going to disappear. They always reappear in a different form, and the youth has to be told what is in store for them if they don't fight back. We have to fight back. We have to be vigilant, and we have to be fully aware that the world is not a nice place to live in, at least at the moment, and that fascism doesn't disappear, and we have to all the time fight back and be ready to fight.
Colette Levy is absolutely right when she says we have to be vigilant in the fight against racism and fascism. So a big thank you to Colette for sending that video to us with those moving and powerful words. I suppose, to read some comments in support. Gareth says, fascism, never again. Coral sends respects to Colette. And Vivek says, very moving to hear Colette speak. Certainly agree with all of those comments. And please keep your comments coming in and keep sharing the live stream as we go on. I'm going to hand over now to Sabby Dhalu. Sabby Dhalu is the co-convener of Stand Up to Racism. So Sabby, over to you.
Thank you very much, everyone. I want to thank all of our speakers, and I want to thank our officers for supporting us, and all of our new members and existing current members, and our local groups, because it's been a really difficult year and we've all achieved so much together. And also I want to say solidarity with everyone that's lost a loved one to racism, and solidarity and thoughts with Colette for losing her sister a few months ago, and thank you. So obviously the two big things that have happened since last year's conference are COVID and the Black Lives Matter movement. So police harassment, as we all know, is not unique to the US, and we should all know that stop and search has got worse under the Johnson government. And it's no accident that the Black Lives Matter movement emerged out of the COVID crisis. And we should all remember that COVID is a Black issue and it's an anti-racist issue, because firstly, it's had a disproportionate impact on BAME communities. 20% of hospital admissions are BAME, 40% of intensive care patients are BAME, and BAME communities were 40% less likely to be furloughed than their white counterparts. And secondly, we've seen a shameful whipping up of racism by our government to distract from its COVID calamity. As night follows day, when politicians blow the dog whistle on racism, it leads to a rise in racist attacks on the ground. So we've seen a record rise in racist attacks. We've seen human rights lawyers attacked aggressively, who quite rightly lay the blame squarely at Priti Patel's doorstep and attacks on lefty do-gooding lawyers. We've seen a rise in racist attacks on all BAME communities, Muslim communities, Jewish communities, and of course this year a staggering rise in racist attacks on Chinese community. And this current COVID calamity is due to government policy which has not eliminated COVID, unlike other countries. And these local lockdowns are not working. They are not getting rid of the virus, but instead are exacerbating economic hardship on those communities. So we demand a zero COVID strategy to eliminate the virus because of the disproportionate impact on BAME communities. And that means proper lockdowns, and we have to bring back furlough because we need proper financial support for people during that time. And we support the NEU's circuit breaker school closure during half term. We demand that police officers are charged with the killing of Black people in police custody. We demand a public inquiry into the disproportionate impact of COVID on BAME communities. We demand an ending of stop and search and scrapping Section 60 and ending the criminalisation of Black communities. But I think above all, what we need is unity of all communities against racism and fascism. That's how we've defeated racism and fascism. We need unity of Muslims, Jews, Sikhs, Hindus, Asian, African, Caribbean, Chinese, trade unions, socialists, liberals. We need to unite with LGBT communities, disabled communities, young people, students. We need to unite together in a movement against racism and fascism. We're a really small proportion of the population here. We have to unite together against racism and fascism here and put differences on any other issues, and including international issues aside, to unite against racism here. So I want to say thank you to everyone who's joined this conference, and thank you to all of our new members, because we've had so many new members this year. And I look forward to working with every single one of you in the coming months and years ahead. Thank you, and solidarity.
Thank you so much, Sabby, and thank you for reminding us the only way forward is through unity, and we need unity. That's the only way to eradicate racism, fascism, and all form of racism, really. We're going to be taking a audio from Penally refugee. They have sent us a message via Stand Up to Racism group, who has been working in solidarity with them since they were moved into an ex-army base in horrifying condition. They wish to remain anonymous, but also to speak out at this conference. So, yeah, audio.
Hello. I hope our message reach all people that are concerned about racism, fighting racism, and human rights. We are staying in a really bad place. This is the camp that we are staying in. Has nothing to do with COVID-19 regulations. They have shared everything, bathrooms, shower rooms, even the rooms that we are staying in. Some people are less fortunate, staying like over 6, maybe more, I don't know, in one room. But the normal is like 4 or 2 in a room. And also, you know, the place we eat in, yeah, everything, and the buildings, all buildings has asbestos in them, and they have warnings and so on, so they are not suitable for people to live in. And the place is like secured by guards that does not allow you to enter after 10 or 11, something like this. I've never seen things like this before. and nobody's comfortable staying here. Me personally, I feel depressed since the day I came. Some people in this small town are good and friendly, and the other people are the whole opposite, and they are opposite in a very, very bad way. The second day we came here, someone was, I don't want to mention his name, he got run over from one of the residents of, I don't know, Penally, Tembe, this place, somewhere around. He got run over by a car. And he was just like having a walk. That's it. Nothing. He thought that they were trying to welcome him or wave at him or something like this, but they did the opposite. Also, the most important thing that affected me personally was when we were staying there in London, somewhere outside London. They refused. They first of all, they told us to go back to our rooms and be ready at 4 a.m. Like 6 hours or 7 hours before. And then I kept asking everybody, and I begged everybody to tell me where we were going, because I have people that I know, siblings, things, living in London and other places, but mainly in London. They all refused, and they told us that we don't know, and the Home Office didn't want to tell us where you are moving. Some people told us London, some people told us other places, but it was all like guesses. They all refused. The only way we knew about where we are going was in the bus, from the bus driver. I asked him, what's the destination of our trip? Where are we going? It's like more than 7 hours, maybe. Yeah, we got from there around 5:30 till 11:30. We were not here. We arrived like 11:45, something like this. It's extremely far from where I need to be, or where I be comfortable to be there. I don't know what to say. I have many things, other things to say, but I actually have nobody is helping other than this kind people of anti-racism, like this community. Some people are really kind and nice, but I don't know what else to expect from our stay here.
That was an absolutely courageous testimony from the refugees in Penally, as Rhoda has said in the comments. And I just want to say that actually they're watching and listening to the plenary going on right now as we speak. And so we want to send them our solidarity, from all the hundreds of us joining the conference to the refugees in Penally, and offer our support and so on. I suppose, so moving on to our next speaker, we're going to be hearing from Dinah Mulholland. But before Dinah comes in and speaks, we're going to watch a short video. But just to introduce Dinah, Dinah was a parliamentary candidate in West Wales, which covers Penally, where the refugee camp has been set up on a military base. So we'll watch a short video and then hear from Dinah.
Sorry, Nigel, the video happened.
I think we may have had the video.
Yeah, I think we've had the video. Sorry, I'll let you go, Dinah.
That's cool. Hi. Thanks. It's quite hard to follow, I think, the audio recording that we've just heard. But I'm here anyway today on behalf of Stand Up to Racism West Wales, and really just to say a little bit more about the situation in Penally and what's happening there. And for those of you who don't know, Penally is a coastal village in Pembrokeshire, and it's in deepest rural West Wales. During the last month, I think now a total of 235 male asylum seekers have been housed in a disused British Army training camp in Penally. And this is why all the claims are being processed. Now, this has happened without any notice or any consultation with the local authority or even with Welsh Government, and certainly not with the local community. And as you've heard already, certainly not with any consultation with the refugees that are now being housed there. And it's, as you've heard, entirely unsuitable and inhumane and dangerous accommodation. So what's happened is that far-right activists led by a group called Voice of Welsh from Swansea have launched themselves into that vacuum. And I think that the situation at Penally was probably perceived as a kind of an easy win for the far right, given that vacuum, that communication vacuum, and also given the relative poverty of West Wales and a flattened local economy due to COVID and Brexit. But there's more background to this as well, which is that we're in the run-up now to the Welsh Parliament, the Senedd elections in May 2021, and Voice of Wales, this far-right group, have been using the situation at Penally as an opportunity to soften up the ground, really, and get the racist UKIP Senedd member, Neil Hamilton, re-elected in the region. And unfortunately, what we've seen is some locals who have engaged with Hamilton and engaged with the far right, and the far right there are initiating and driving harassment and abuse of the asylum seekers in some of the most horrific ways. And so you've heard some of that. And unfortunately, abuse of the men in the camp has actually become a kind of like local evenings entertainment. And the local police, who are under-resourced, but they are also really quite reluctant to engage in this, have effectively allowed this to develop. But what I'd like to say is that actually I don't think the far right did their homework properly, because actually West Wales has got some of the most experienced and capable anti-racist activists, and Pembrokeshire is a very welcoming and warm county. So our response has actually been to mobilise, and we've organised regular counter protests against the far right outside the camp. We've also organised some slightly softer community and awareness raising events like beach gatherings and sand art and tying labels onto the fence at the asylum seekers camp. And we've effectively, that's given people the kind of the decent and humane alternative that they really, really needed to hear, and allowed them to rebut the shame that I think so many of them felt in Pembrokeshire being associated with the far right in this way. And the response has been extraordinary, I have to say, absolutely extraordinary. We've had over 3,000 local people engaging online and hundreds attending events countering the far right in many, many different ways. It's also really good to report that we've got some very strong and positive relationships with the men in the camp that are now developing, and they tell us that they really appreciate our presence, and we have a whole network of refugee support that's blossomed in an incredibly short space of time, and that's all from local people and local voluntary organisations. We've also set up a system of reporting racist and abusive posts online, and pressure and advice has been put put to the local police, and that's actually led to far-right activists there being investigated and arrested, and a further 2 arrests were made yesterday morning at the far-right protest outside the camp. We've had their Facebook page taken down, and we're pushing back, and we're taking back the space and the discourse. What I'd really like to report as well is we've initiated some work with Wales TUC Cymru and with the local unions, local and regional politicians, and we are working really hard to mobilise a mass political and cultural movement in opposition to racism and to the far right in Wales, and to oppose the scapegoating of refugees. And in fact, I just heard this afternoon that as a result of our activity, Wales TUC Cymru are now lobbying Welsh Government for decent accommodation for the men and for the police to use COVID-19 regulations to limit the far right gatherings outside the camp. And I'd just like to finish by saying that although we've achieved a great deal so far, there's a lot more to be done, as you have heard from the men in the camp. And as we move forward, I think it's absolutely vital that in order to achieve systemic change, we need to work at a systemic level. So as well as local activity, we need to join up as an organised mass movement that will overwhelm the poisonous message of the Tories and their racist elected representatives and the far right handmaidens, and create the change that we all need to see at Penally, but also across Wales, and that it's happening, and that we're doing the very best we can to achieve that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dinah, for sharing what is going on there and letting us know what is going on there. And we are sending you our full solidarity and support to the local doing the amazing work, but also to the refugees that are inside the camp. Just a reminder that we have 2 more speakers that has to go, including Diane Abbott. Sorry about the background noise. I'm going to introduce our next speaker, Richard Bergen, he's Richard Burgon MP for Member of Parliament for Leeds East since 2015, and he was a former shadow State of Justice Secretary. So yeah. Richard.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all the speakers, and thank you to everyone who's joined this call. We're meeting today during the deepest crisis we've ever faced. A public health emergency, one of the worst ever recessions with mass unemployment looming, while every day the climate catastrophe is becoming more and more clear. We know that as sure as night follows day, in the middle of this crisis, the elites will seek to defend their privilege, their wealth and their power by scapegoating, by the tactic of divide and rule. We've seen that with Trump's reactionary election campaign. Hopefully, he'll be booted out next month, a blow to the extreme right-wing movements the world over. But of course, it's easy to look at the United States and then turn a blind eye here. We can't. The last few weeks, with the Home Secretary suggesting migrants be banished to faraway islands or that nets be put up in the Channel, shows that the race card will be played here and is being played here. Every time the coronavirus crisis gets worse, the Tories are ramping up their migrant-bashing rhetoric to deflect and distract from having no answers to the crisis that people in our communities are facing. Sadly, we should expect more of this in the coming months. So, what do we do about that? The anti-racist message and the message of equality must be at the core of our response to the multiple crises. The starting point to fighting racism must be an unwavering support for the huge anti-racism movement that has grown across the globe since the killing of George Floyd. The mass movement that is Black Lives Matter echoes the civil rights movement of the 1960s, and we need to ensure that it leads to the kind of deep change that that movement did. The pandemic has shone a spotlight on the deep structural inequalities that scar our society today. Black Lives Matter has rightly pushed for structural racism to be addressed. They've pushed that issue to the very top of the agenda. So that's racism in housing, racism in employment, racism in education, racism in the justice system, and so on. Because of that, there will be all sorts of attempts by the powers that be to undermine Black Lives Matter, to highlight this tactic or that action, to discredit the movement, just as they did to striking miners in 1984 to 85 and to peace activists of past generations. Our response must be one of solidarity with Black Lives Matter. As part of fighting institutional racism, we need to be stepping up the campaign for justice for Grenfell and justice for the Windrush victims. We can't allow those battles to fall off the agenda. The task of dismantling that systemic and institutionalized racism requires huge social change to the economic and social system that has created and reinforced that oppression. That means, I say, that the left must ensure that anti-racism is at the core of our politics. Some do try to say that somehow anti-racism is a distraction from class politics. I think this is a deep and dangerous mistake. Firstly, we have to tackle every single form of oppression. We want a society where nobody faces any disadvantage or any discrimination. But tackling racism is also essential if we are to build the unity of the 99% that will be essential in the coming struggles over public health, over the economy, and over the climate. To win change, we need unity across the working class as a whole, across the working class in all its diversity. Today's working class communities in Britain are incredibly diverse, and the solutions that we put forward must reflect that. There can be no unity unless our movements challenge every form of oppression, including racism, anti-Semitism, and Islamophobia that will be used to divide us. And then with that unity, we must demand the social change that roots out decades of entrenched discrimination through a fundamental reorganization of our institutions, our economy, and yes, wider society. And so every change that roots out this racist discrimination will be a blow against the system. It's in the interests of the 99%, a gain for the working class as a whole, and a step towards transforming our whole society for the better, a society with justice and equality at its core. Counterposed to the unity of the 99%, of course, and a society that serves the many is division, hate, and even violence. If we say this is going to be one of the deepest recessions since the 1930s, then there is a real danger that there will be the rise of far-right movements that defined that era too. So, over the coming months, we must stand shoulder to shoulder with women, disabled people, Black, Muslim and Jewish communities, LGBT plus people, and create the broadest possible movement against the rise of the far right that even before this crisis was in its strongest position in Europe for decades. And we must learn from the recent blow against the fascist Golden Dawn in Greece with the jailing of its leaders. That shows the kind of response we need. Not long ago, when Golden Dawn did well in elections, some sought to accept that Golden Dawn was a permanent force. And as always happens, there were calls to accept some of their arguments as so-called legitimate concerns. But the Greek anti-fascist movement never went down that path of accommodation. It tackled every myth, responded to every racist attack, and through its actions has secured a huge victory. We must learn from that. Of course, far-right parties have been emboldened over the past 2 decades by the increasingly racist rhetoric of mainstream politicians, whipped up to either justify foreign military action or to scapegoat migrants or others for their failed economic system. As we know, racism is inherent to our capitalist system, the development of which was in modern Britain and which was built upon a bedrock of slavery. That's why the demand for a curriculum that addresses the truth about history is such an important one, because if we don't acknowledge that past, then we're not going to be able to tackle ongoing racism within the British state. And I offer my full solidarity to the NEU and to others demanding this. But racism also has its origins in the ongoing oppression of most of humanity under our global economic system. And that continues today. And we've seen soaring state-sanctioned Islamophobia seeking to justify wars in the Middle East in recent decades. And any global recession will also see international tensions rise. Already, Trump is becoming more and more belligerent. Attacks on the World Health Organization are signs of a more unilateral and beggar thy neighbor policy. And with those mounting tensions will become more xenophobia and more racism, including increasing the rhetoric against China as certain leaders seek to pursue a new Cold War. We need to ensure that anti-Chinese racism, xenophobia, linked to that is tackled. Chinese communities in all our cities and towns will be the victims of such demonisation. We must stand with them. So, to conclude, as the coming crisis deepens, we need to build a class of politics that reflects the working class in all its diversity. And that means fundamentally having anti-racism at its core, because a socialist politics is not truly socialist politics unless it has anti-racism at its core. I want to congratulate Stand Up to Racism for this event. I want to congratulate Stand Up to Racism for all they do, from bringing people together and to giving a voice to those who are far too often rendered voiceless by the system of repression that exists in our society. And for example, the testimony we heard earlier should be heard by every single politician who either themselves fuels the politics of the hostile environment or seeks to look the other way whilst it continues to thrive with dreadful human consequences. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that, Richard, and thanks for joining us as well. We've got some comments here in support. You know, Chris says Richard Bergen is a principled and dedicated trade unionist, and Sarah says, yes, Richard, united we are strong. I agree. I agree with those comments as well. So thank you, Richard, for joining us. To move on to our final speaker for what's been a fantastic plenary, I'm incredibly excited to introduce Diane Abbott. Diane Abbott is the president of Stand Up to Racism, and has been a member of Parliament for Hackney North and Stoke Newington since 1987, and is the former Shadow Home Secretary. So a big welcome to Diane Abbott.
Thank you very much. You've had some brilliant speakers in this plenary. And in closing, I just want to say a few things. But first of all, I want to offer my solidarity to the refugees, and in particular, the person that spoke so bravely and came on this call. I want to offer them my solidarity and to say it is so wrong that we have criminalized refugees. People have an absolute legal right to claim asylum. And yet, under the Tories, and sadly under New Labour, we have criminalized asylum seekers. But I also want to give solidarity to Dinah Mulholland and the local people in West Wales who have mobilised and organised to support the refugees. So, as you've heard from the other speakers, we live in very dark times. We have a racist US president, and he is the most racist US president that I can remember. And I can remember Ronald Reagan, Richard Nixon, and I've never known a US president who so blatantly pandered to white nationalism in the way that Donald Trump does. And we all have to hope and pray that he loses the forthcoming presidential election. But we also have a racist British Prime Minister. I don't think anyone that's seen the things that Boris has said and done about grinning pickaninnies, I don't think anyone doubts that sadly he is a racist. And when you have people at the very top of the political pyramid who are racist, what you see is what we have seen is a rise in racism in state institutions, a rise in racism generally, and we've seen that, a rise in anti-Black racism, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia. We've also seen a rise, in particular, in anti-Chinese racism. Global traffic to anti-Asian hate sites has doubled. Hate crime in this country against Chinese people has gone up 300%. And the increase in the global use of Twitter hashtags encouraging violence against China and Chinese people has gone up by 900%. And so we see the rise in racism. We see the rise in racism in state institutions, whether it's police in the United States, and we've all seen the horrible images of George Floyd being killed in plain sight by a policeman, but also racism in the police here in Britain. Ryan spoke very well about his experience about stop and search by the police. And it's worth repeating that Black people are disproportionately likely to be stopped and searched. We are disproportionately likely to be handcuffed. We are even disproportionately likely to be fined under coronavirus legislation. So how President Dick can say there's no institutional racism in the Metropolitan Police, I'm afraid I do not know. And of course, we also heard from Mina Agyepong and her awful experience of being raided by the police because someone saw her 12-year-old boy with a gun. We're seeing a rise in racism in immigration. Trump talking about his wall to keep Latino migrants out. Trump putting migrants in cages and separating children from their parents. And here in Britain, we've had the horrific racist narrative in the media about channel crossings. These are desperate people from Syria and North Africa trying to cross to safety in rubber boats, rubber dinghies. And the British media is talking about them as if they're an invading army. And British politicians are talking about bringing the Navy in to turn the boats round, to have a wave machine. It's as if they don't care about the lives of those people trying to flee to safety. And just on the question of Windrush, some of you will have seen Tory politicians say how sorry they are about what happened with Windrush, where a whole generation of Caribbean migrants were criminalised and deported and harassed. Well, they're not that sorry, because although they claim they were running a scheme to compensate these people, actually pathetically small sums of money has been paid out. The compensation, the mechanism is going incredibly slowly. And the danger is, because this is an aging cohort, very many of them will die before they get the compensation they're entitled to. That's how sorry the Tories are about Windrush, not sorry at all. And of course, you've heard about coronavirus and how that has shone a light on inequality, including racial inequality. And, you know, we could have done a lot better against coronavirus if this government hadn't been so anxious to dish out these huge contracts to private sector operators like Serco, who've made a complete mess of test and trace. If they had listened to trade unions like the NEU, we heard from Kevin Courtney earlier, and the UCU, who tried to say what would happen if you brought children back to school and brought students back to university. They tried to say, and they were right, there has been a terrible spike in infections, but the government wouldn't listen to them because they don't want to listen to working people. And there was even an element in the Labour Party which didn't want to listen to the unions either. But here we are. It's a time of crisis. It's a time of rising racism, and it is as if we are going to plunge into a terrible economic crisis. But you know, Dinah Mulholland, speaking earlier, actually showed us the way. The way is to come together and to organise, whether you're organising locally, whether you're organising in your trade union, whether you're organising nationally. Working people need to unite and come together. We need to push back against the rise in racism. We have to push back against racist politicians, not just because we want to be charitable to be migrants and people of colour, but because we will all be stronger, we will all be better if we come together, if we organise, and if we stand up to racism. Thank you very much for inviting me to speak. I think it's been a tremendous plenary, and I look forward to seeing some of the people on the call in the coming period as we work and campaign against racism. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that, Diane. And I want to emphasize what you said. You know, I think it is absolutely important that we come together, we unite, and we organize. So thanks very much for closing our plenary, and really thanks to all of our speakers for those powerful contributions, and also thank you to everyone at home for, you know, joining us and being part of the discussion and sharing your thoughts with us this evening. And I suppose I wanted to flag up some events before people leave and so on, because we want to turn what we've been talking about here today and over the weekend in general through the conference. We want to turn these things into concrete action and so on. And so I suppose to emphasize some of the dates and key times in the calendar in that project. You know, first of all, on the 4th of November, people will be gathering outside of the US Embassy to offer solidarity to the Black Lives Matter movement in the United States in a socially distanced fashion with plenty of PPE and so on. So please do find out about your, get in touch with your local branch, Stand Up to Racism branch, and find out how you can be a part of that and so on. Also in November, we have Islamophobia Awareness Month, and Stand Up to Racism will be holding events on Islamophobia and supporting initiatives led by different Muslim groups. So if you want to find out more about Islamophobia Awareness Month, then go to MEND's website. So that's mend.org.uk / Islamophobia Awareness Month. / again. Again, to repeat, you know, the Care for Calais winter appeal is happening now at a time where refugees are facing the harshness of winter and are in vulnerable conditions across Europe. And so please do visit and lend support to Care for Calais. You can visit their website, which is careforcalais.org.uk, and from the 1st of November, and you'll be able to find out how you can help towards the winter appeal. And I suppose the final, not actually, so no, not at all the final point, you know, going into the new year in January, you know, we'll be marking Holocaust Memorial Day. And it's important that everyone unites against anti-Semitism and fascism and say loudly, you know, and clearly, never again. So again, contact your local branch if you want to be involved in organizing things for that. And the final thing really is UN Anti-Racism Day. This in 2021 is going to be on the 20th of March, and we'll be seeing events and actions taking place not just all over the country, but all over the world as well for UN Anti-Racism Day. So again, get organized, get linked up to people and be a part of that in the coming months. And I think if you want to, you know, build actions across Britain, then, you know, please join and share the Facebook event by going to the Stand Up to Racism Facebook page and share and lend your support that way. And I suppose the final point to really say, now that we've got the key dates and so on out the way, is that, you know, if you're not a part of Stand Up to Racism, or you haven't joined yet, then I'd strongly encourage you to join us and help us build, you know, a mass anti-racist movement that not only can smash racism, but win, you know, real fundamental change. And I'll leave it at that. Solidarity with everyone.